Welcome. You're listening to the GrowOrtho podcast, presented by HIP. This podcast is dedicated to orthodontists who want to stand strong in their market and be leaders in their community. Now, on to today's show. So, Rob, thanks so much for taking the time to chat with me today.
Luke, thanks for having me.
Definitely. So, for those listening or watching who don't know you, just take a few minutes, give an intro of yourself, your company, hobbies, your mission and purpose.
Yeah. So I have a law firm with 7 attorneys. We are focused exclusively in the healthcare space. And within that healthcare space, I'd say probably about 90% is representing dentists who are doing business transactions, employment agreements, really all the non-litigation things that come up in the course of a dental practice. So we help people that are buying practices, we help people that are selling practices, partnerships, buy-ins, lease reviews for startups and for office expansions. And we just celebrated our 25th anniversary of the firm.
Nice.
The office is Robert Montgomery, which is time flies when you're having fun, Luke. And sometimes when you're not having as much fun. But I all kidding aside, I've enjoyed having my own practice and really have been focused pretty much in the dental world for just about all of my my practice. We're best known to a lot of people through the URL for our website, which is yourdentallawyer.com. We help people around the country for the most part. We're not helping folks in California at this time. That's one of the few major markets that we're not involved in. But most other places, we're licensed or we work with people there that we're able to help our dental clients. And these days, as far as hobbies go, it kind of changes seasonally and from year to year, Luke. But kind of got back to my roots within the last year and doing a lot more open water swimming. So that's keeping me busy these days.
Nice. So I believe you have just a short disclaimer too before we jump into the questions.
Absolutely. Well, this is what you get when you have a lawyer on your podcast, Luke.
Of course.
So we will talk about legal issues today. I want to make sure that everybody understands that this is for informational purposes only. And if you have a legal matter, you should seek the specific advice of a lawyer for your specific circumstance. And I will say that, Luke, from time to time, I've had conversations with people that have said, well, Rob, you said that we should do that, or you said we should do that. I'm looking back at my notes and go, I don't remember this. I don't think this is something I would say under these circumstances. Like, when did I tell you that? Well, in that podcast, you said that. I'm like, no, it's not right. So, this is, again, just giving people general information. You should always get specific advice from a lawyer.
Definitely seek counsel from your actual counsel.
Yes.
Cool. All right. Well, let's jump into the first question I have for you, which is, how do you find the right opportunity for buying a practice?
There's really no one size fits all, and it depends on a lot where you're located in the country, the type of practice that you're looking to buy. I think one of the most important things, though, is to be an active member in your dental professional community. Get to know the other professionals, know the younger dentists who might be potential associates of yours in the future, or buy-in candidates or partners. Get to know the older dentists who may be selling at some point in time. I mean, I think overall, that's where the best relationships are forged, and it's the best place to start. Absent that, you can work with brokers if you're looking, especially in an area where you don't presently live, you're relocating to another part of the country. It's hard to be active in the Boise dental community if you're in Detroit, for example. Yeah. So working with a broker, and if you're working with a broker, several brokers you need to work with if you're in that instance, because unlike the real estate world where somebody lists their practice and all the realtors know that practice is for sale and they have the ability to help broker that, in the practice transition world, there's no such thing as a multiple listing. So you have to go and really try to work with and network with all of the brokers so that they know who you are, that you're looking to purchase a practice. And I think the more purposeful you are and the more you take care of all the background steps, the better candidate you'll be in that world, because we're still very much in a seller's market. So anything that you can do to separate yourself from, we'll call it the competition for the practice acquisition, the better. So we talk about developing bank relationships, being pre-approved, those types of things that will kind of bump you to the front of the line and make you a more serious buyer. And that's what sellers brokers are looking for in that instance. The other thing I would say too is you can network with other professionals in the community, especially dental supply reps, CPAs, people that have an inventory of potential dental sellers.
Awesome. Yeah, I would imagine there's a lot of ways to skin the cat, right? Brokers, networking. I think there's even third-party agencies that may help or assist and work with brokers or attorneys. So, how do you know?
Let me say this too. Like, one thing that you really shouldn't do as your primary way to find a practice is to surf websites and look at listings like that. I mean, that may initiate a conversation with a broker, but if you see a practice online that seems like a good one, chances are 20 other people have already reached out. So It's better to have that relationship with the broker that's got those listings, so that before it hits the website, you know about that listing.
Yeah, I've seen orthodontists and dentists kind of try and, I guess, negotiate their own deal. And I don't know if that's right or wrong. I don't know enough about it, but I have seen bad deals, where the orthodontist or dentist gets into a situation and they didn't know all the details. There were not proper contingencies in place or terms. And I've also seen acquisitions happen and then the practice just drops massively in production.
Yeah.
So I think, what you're saying, from what I've seen and the little I know, working with an expert, whoever it is, just to ensure, I'm sure attorneys, brokers, et cetera, ensuring that both parties are protected.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you're really talking about is assembling the team. As a buyer, the broker really isn't part of your team. I mean, the broker is somebody that you network with for the opportunity, but you have to realize what everybody's role is here. The broker's role is to introduce a buyer and a seller and facilitate a transaction. It's not to look out for the buyer. Now, I'm not saying that brokers are not, they're doing sleazy things, or they're doing something that's predatory. But it's just like anything. It's not their job to look out for you, the buyer. The two key players in a practice acquisition are your attorney and your CPA. And I really will tell you, Luke, if you work with a good dental-focused CPA and a good dental-focused lawyer, the chance and the risk of doing a bad deal becomes really, really small. And anything less than working with good people who are experienced in both of those professions, then the risk level starts to increase. And you can do these things on your own, because most dental practices and ortho practices are going to succeed. I mean, the default rate in these deals and in the industry on loans and leases is very, very low. However, not defaulting is very different from thriving. And so just because you can buy a practice and hypothetically, pay $1 million for it, and that within a year, you've lost so many patients that it's worth $600,000, that's not a good deal. It's probably not a deal, though, that you're going to default on the loan, right? So you really want to set the table right, because for most people, these are what we refer to as one transactions. You will do this once in your professional career. You will not get a second bite of the apple. And if you're upside down the practice, it loses value. You can't just give it back. You can't sell a practice for less than what you paid for it in recent times if you still owe a lot of money in the loan. So it's really important to take all that steps, work with the right team, and prepare yourself and avail yourself of all the best advice that you can to reduce that risk.
Yeah. And my next question, I think you somewhat answered it, which is, how do you know if you're overpaying for a practice? I would imagine, that's part of the right team and the CPA as well. Is that right?
It is. And, even though I'm a lawyer, we'll probably spend as much time on this podcast talking about the importance of a CPA in a deal as a lawyer. Absolutely. But, I will say, just philosophically, I don't like people to over obsess on the right purchase price. Okay. The more important component to me is, what does the cash flow look like of the deal, the estimated post-closing cash flow. And what we're talking about is, if you pay X for this practice, you borrow Y, and the practice maintains the similar level of revenue and profit, what will you expect to make? And so if you have a deal where maybe you're quote unquote overpaying by $100,000, but from a cash flow standpoint, you're making $700,000 a year, that could be a better deal than quote unquote underpaying by $50,000 and making $300,000 a year. Okay. So the big one for me is, what does that cash flow look like? Now, they become related things. I mean, if you wildly overpay for a practice, that means you're taking a much larger loan than you should be from a cash flow revenue standpoint and profitability standpoint. And then those two things do collide. But again, to me, the most important thing is, if you're going to borrow $800,000 for this ortho practice acquisition, how much can you expect to make? And if you like that number, then that's a deal you should do. And whether or not you may have overpaid a little bit in the long term, it may not matter. And so where we see people, one of the main places where we see people make the mistakes in this is where they're not working with a good dental focused CPA to tell them, hey, this is what you can expect to make after you purchase this practice, or even more dangerously, Luke, after you buy into this practice. Practice buy-ins, partnerships are a lot trickier from a legal standpoint, and certainly more complicated from a cash flow standpoint and from an accounting and due diligence standpoint. But the people that don't do that, you essentially are just picking what's behind door number 2, and you don't want to find out after you've paid $800,000 for a practice, or for 50% interest in a practice, find out 6 months later what that means to you from an economic standpoint. Because again, that's really just choosing what's behind door number 2. Know going into the transaction that everything stays steady, like we talked about. I borrow this money. Here's what I think I'm going to make. And then you make that informed decision, because a lot of times people will come to us after the fact, not our clients, and they'll say, I thought I was going to make more money. This practice is not doing so well. I really thought that I would make double that. Well, why did you think that, Doc? Well, I had a friend that did a similar deal in Austin, and I thought that it would be the same thing in Minneapolis. No, these are two different practices. Just, you can't, it's not one size fits all. So it's really, really important to make sure you avail yourself of that step, because at the end of the day, whether you paid the right number or not, doesn't matter if you're not making enough money.
Yeah. And just to go back again, my very limited experience in this topic, from what I've seen, the partnerships, acquisitions, transitions that have been successful, specifically for a doctor acquiring a practice, is if they're a good culture fit. If the current owner and the current team align with the prospective owner, because I've seen where that doesn't happen, and people just think, oh, well, this looks good on paper, and then they go in and the whole team quits, and so again, just from what I've seen, make sure that it is a culture fit, that you possibly even your principles and ethics align, so the transition is much easier. That's my opinion, but that's what I've seen from deals that have gone successful and deals that have gone bad. So
it's a great point, Luke, because really you're buying goodwill. When you look at the purchase price, it actually gets allocated in the agreement. Roughly 80 to 85% of that purchase price is allocated towards goodwill, and the balance of it essentially to the equipment and the furniture in the practice, which, this is about goodwill. And if you don't like the goodwill that you're buying, or it's not something that you really want, or it's not going to jive and lead to a good transition, then it's not something you should do. So like where people, as you said, like they obsess or maybe over obsess about the numbers and then say, well, when I buy this practice, I'm going to change this. I'm going to cut these salaries. I'm going to fire this person. I'm going to get rid of this associate. I'm going to change this, this, and that. And at a certain point, you've changed so much, then it's like, well, why did you pay for this thing that you really didn't like? Or wasn't comfortable. And my industry longtime friend, Jamie Amos, the big startup consultant, likes to say, a surfer should buy a surfer dentist practice, right? So where you have that same philosophy that, hey, you know what, some days we may call in, we may close the office early, our patients are going to go surfing, we're going to go surfing, our staff wants to. If you're a surfer, you can buy a surfer's practice. If you're not a surfer and you buy a surfer's practice and you say, wow, we've got this schedule, what do you mean we're canceling people the next 2 days? Like we're fully booked and because the waves are big, like I can't wrap my brain around that. So it's a funny metaphor, but I think, it works. And so it really speaks to making sure that what you're looking to do is consistent with what you're getting.
Yeah. I like that. And I may steal that and reuse it. That's a good one. Keeps it very simple to explain. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about cash flow. You mentioned cash flow, analyzing the cash flow. What is a projected cash flow analysis?
So projected cash flow analysis is where a CPA is going to look at previous performance of the practice, usually 3 years of revenue and expenses. Now, as we sit here in 2022, there's a year in there that's a little bit of an outlier in the world and in the industry. But generally, you're looking at the last 3 years where, and then you extrapolate that and say, if this continues at this pace, this is what you can expect to make from a profit standpoint. And then if you're paying X number of dollars and borrowing that money from the bank, you have to pay the bank back. This is how much money, cash flow, will end up in your pocket at the end of the year.
Got it. And, you mentioned last year being tricky just because for most of the people I know, production was way up. And so collections are higher this year, specifically in orthodontic practices. Yeah. But it seems like for the most part, everybody did really well last year. And, a lot of people have questions, and we're already seeing that's probably not going to continue. And so, since people are looking at the past 3 years, do you have any type of advice? You mentioned that it's very much a seller's market right now still. Is there any benefit, to waiting and continuing to try to grow the practice? If you're on the fence, is now still a good time to pursue a deal?
From a buyer standpoint, Luke?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a matter of timing for people. The last 3 years there were 2 years of outliers, actually. 2020 was a bad year in the negative. 21 was probably unnaturally high. So I think it's really getting your arms around what realistically the practice is doing, looking at year to date in 2022, looking back at 2019. And again, I'm getting out of my lane here a little bit because this is really something an accountant does. But it's the importance of working with somebody that understands these changes in the industry that could come and help you understand what is a realistic expectation. But it also depends kind of what the margin is with the risk, Luke. Like if you're talking about, well, and from a cash flow standpoint, am I making 600 or 700? Maybe it's hard to nail that down. But if the associate is presently making $180,000 a year, then waiting 2 years and passing on something that might be 600 or 700 may not be in their best interest. So a lot of it is personal to the buyer, and it depends on the particular practice that you're looking at, which is, again, all this stuff is not one size fits all. And it's working with your team who should understand what your goals are, where you are now, what you're looking to do. Because the cost of waiting can be significant as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. Have you experienced working with maybe some people who don't know if they're a good fit for buying and owning a practice, and they're an associate, they're maybe questioning it. Are there certain things, characteristics that make someone more apt to do well in owning a practice? I guess being an entrepreneur to some degree, business owner.
Yeah.
What's your opinion around that?
Yeah, I will tell you that most of the people that make it to us are entrepreneurial people that are focused, that realize the importance of working and assembling a team. And they're people that have done their homework, they've done their due diligence on their lawyers, their CPAs, they've availed themselves of the process, they've educated themselves, they've prepared themselves for practice ownership. That's our gang for the most part. From time to time, we do get people that are a little bit more on the fence. And what I would say is, if you're not committed to this for the right reasons, and you don't want to put that time in and that work in to learn about the process, to work hard to help find the right practice, to put the time in to understand what you're getting, what your professionals are doing, why they're doing it, then you probably should think twice about whether or not this is the right thing to do. There's a lot more to owning a business than just hanging the sign outside, as we both know. And there's a lot of time and there's a lot of work that goes into that. And if you're not really up to the task leading into the transaction, you're not going to be suddenly empowered after, probably either. And and that's okay. If you don't,
right,
if not something that you want to do for the right reasons, then it's not the right thing for you. I mean, I could tell you, as I said, I've had my own professional practice that I did as a startup 25 years ago. There have been good days and bad days, but I've always enjoyed the ability to practice the profession how I want, when I want, with whom I want. I choose the people, the lawyers and the paralegals and the staff that I work with. I get to pick and choose who the clients are that we work with. That's a great thing. And so, I mean, to me, there would be no other alternative than owning a practice, but it's not for everybody. And there's a lot of work that goes into practice ownership. There's a lot of headache and a lot of hassle. And if you're not up for that, it's more than just collecting the money and depositing checks in the bank and getting paid. You really have to want to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know some people who have avoided this. Maybe they were on the fence or, had a family member who was very successful doing it and decided not to do it, stay an associate. And, those individuals do extremely well also. I think it's about, knowing who you are, your goals, maybe even what you're capable of. And the lifestyle that you want, because while there could be potentially a bigger upside to owning a practice or a business, there's also a lot of risk, and so if you don't want to take that on, I think that's a big factor as well. And there's no right or wrong. Like you said, it's okay to be an associate or an employee or whatever. So it's definitely not for everybody. So in terms of scaling, let's say an orthodontist or dentist has a successful thing going. They want to scale. Let's just say maybe they want to take over Austin. They're in the Austin market and just want to continue to scale and grow and do well. From a structure standpoint, how should they structure that business, maybe even in the beginning, to facilitate that type of growth?
Yeah, I don't know if there's that much that you need to do from a structure standpoint immediately with practice number one. But as you continue to grow, that's when you really need to be working with your attorney and your CPA about what the best thing is for you to do. I think it depends kind of what model they want. If you're talking about somebody that wants to grow into a 10 location business, for example, you may want the ability to offer associates equity at the practice level instead of at the overall enterprise level. So you may say, Dr. Smith, I want to incentivize her at office number 2. We would like for her to be a 20% partner there. And so in that regard, you would want office number 2 to be a standalone entity, perhaps, so that each of your offices, you have the ability to offer individuals, your dentists, equity in that particular office instead of the overall. That's one of the things to keep in mind. And I guess that gets impacted by what you do on the earlier stages. So it's probably a conversation that you should be having with counsel and your CPA when it comes time for office number 2. And
Got it.
should we be buying that office or starting that office with our existing entity? Should we be forming a new entity? What are the pros and cons? Same thing, office 2, office 3, and down the line.
Are there any differences when you're maybe looking to go horizontal into multi-specialty? So bringing in pediatric dentistry or oral surgery, or maybe even a different specialty, perio, endo. Any type of difference in terms of structure, bringing that all under one roof?
Yeah, I think you have to be careful about the different economics of the different specialties. The endodontists and orthodontists are both specialists in the dental world, right? The businesses are entirely different. Cost of overhead, how you staff, how you treat patients, and so how they get compensated should be different. And there's things that you need to be aware of. But I mean, we certainly are seeing more and more specialists or group practices that are multi-specialty practices. I mean, one of the things that can be challenging with that is, if you are going to own a multi-specialty practice and you don't have multi-specialty partners, what are you going to do when your oral surgeon leaves or your pedodontist leaves? These are associates. Are you going to be able to replace those people? And it's even worse in a lot of respects if you flip it. So if a general dentist has a practice that also has ortho and pedo, and they lose their ortho, who's going to complete the work? And so there's just some planning that needs to go in that's both financial, economic, but then also clinical as well, just to deal with the fact that obviously you have an ongoing ethical responsibility to your patients to be able to treat them. And if you don't have a partner there who is going to be around and always there to do that, what is your plan, your succession plan when an associate leaves, when you can't replace their production?
Yeah, I would say, again, my limited expertise, but just from what I've seen, sometimes orthodontist or dentist, in this case specifically, I've seen orthodontists try to bring in a different specialty, and it wasn't really strategic. Obviously, it makes sense, right? You can refer between the doctors, so you have that cross-selling aspect. You're able to offer the patient more. But like you said, maybe the oral surgeon left or the pediatric dentist left. And then it becomes really kind of a problem and a time suck, because now you have to replace that person. You've got to do interviews. You've got to figure out how to, translate that and get that word out to the patients. And so what I've seen is, and what I always tell people is, hey, what if you just got more, in this case, orthodontic starts? What if you just, you've got a great thing going. What if you just did 5 or 10 more starts a month? And a lot of times, obviously it depends on goals. And if there is the right partner, that's a different story. But, I would urge people to really think about, if they've got a great thing going and they're niche down, there's a simple saying, there's riches in the niches. And I really believe that. So if you're niche down and it's working, you may want to just continue that. Unless there is the right type of partnership and a great deal and it's strategic. Again, just my advice, but I've seen some things kind of go wrong and then people are in a bind. So wanted to share that. Anything else you would want to share before we wrap up?
No, I don't think so. I think that's what you're saying there is a great thing, and I've seen that over the years, the last 25 years, that I think sometimes people just get bored with what they're doing and they think well, I'll just do this and I'll be equally successful with that. But, the reality is, that if you're bored with running your ortho practice, then, have a hobby and continue to make a lot of money and do and render the best and build the best systems and practice that you can, because, you stick to what you're good at, generally good things are going to happen. I think just in closing, I would say too that just kind of be careful to the people that are buying into practices now. The folks that are transitioning into practice ownership. What we've really seen over the last few years is a somewhat disturbing trend of buy-ins and equity buy-ins as part of a big corporate group. Where a younger associate is owning 10 to 20% of a particular location where they work, something along the lines of what I talked about a few minutes ago. It's a little different in an owner-operator context. I mean, that's a situation that could lead to a future practice transition. But if you're not going to ultimately be able to buy the practice outright or the enterprise outright, you really have to be careful as an associate that's buying into one of those, because in a lot of respects, those deals are often structured in a very predatory way. They're put together, and the documents are put together by very sophisticated counsel who are looking to, quote unquote, win the transaction for their DSO corporate client. And it can be something that's very penal to the dentist, the associate who's contemplating those, where you're not able to leave, or you're not able to get your money back, or you have just an exorbitant covenant not to compete, that you really can stymie your future ability to own and practice your profession. And so those types of deals, I will caution people, and this is sort of my soapbox these days, Luke, that you really, really have to be careful what you're doing. Are you really a partner in this enterprise, or did you just basically guarantee that they'll always have you there and essentially chain yourself to the practice? And there's a difference between that and a true partnership and an owner-operator deal. So buyer beware when it comes to that.
Yeah, make sure it's good for you as well as them, both parties. If it's not a good deal for everybody, it's not a good deal. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. So if an orthodontist or dentist listening today would like to get a hold of you, ask you more questions, possibly even work with you guys, what's the best way for them to reach out?
Really, to go to our website, yourdentallawyer.com. There is a contact us and a portal there where you could submit questions and let us know what you're looking to do. And then someone from my office will get back to you and just talk about the transaction and explain what the process is and answer questions. And we also have links to webinars and podcasts and other good stuff on the website, which we're in the process of redesigning, an ongoing thing. But there is lots of good stuff there, which I think, as we talk about, I think dentists, they're contemplating transitioning into practice ownership. There's so many good resources out there with podcasts and blogs that you really can avail yourself and understand what you're doing and become a more educated consumer and more educated as a future practice owner. That being said, Luke, these are not substitutes for assembling a team. This is one of those places where I really caution people about DIYing it. You can listen to all the podcasts in the world, read all the blog articles, take CEs, and ultimately you still need to have a good professional team. But you certainly will understand better and be a better decision maker if you avail yourself of all that. And there's so much of it is out there and so much of it is free, which is a great resource for people these days.
Yeah, great. Well, I've learned a lot just from the short time that we've talked. So I really appreciate it. I know listeners are going to appreciate it as well. So thanks for much for taking the time and coming on the show today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Luke.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about HIP or any of the topics in this episode, send an email to hello@hipcreativeinc.com. That's hello@hipcreativeinc.com, or jump over to our website at hip.agency.